We're fortunate today to have Utah's Director of Water Resources, who also sits on the Upper Colorado River Commission representing Utah. We've heard a lot about the Upper Colorado River Commission today. And additionally, our speaker, Eric Millis, is chair of the Colorado River Basin Salinity Control Commission, which actually had him in our region for other purposes. So Eric's going to do some multitasking. He's going to give us some perspectives on water issues in Utah and Utah's thoughts perhaps about the Upper Colorado River Commission and Drought Contingency Planning, and certainly about the continuing Salinity Control Commission. So Eric, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I heard Jim say it's the beginning of the end. We'll see how this goes. Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Eric Millis. I'm with the Utah Division of Water Resources and Utah's Interstate Streams Commissioner, and so in that capacity have a lot of opportunity to interact with folks from Colorado as well as from the other Colorado River Basin states, and it is an interesting set of circumstances and times that we're in right now. I've been asked to talk to you some about Utah's proposed Lake Powell Pipeline project, and some about the Colorado River Salinity Control Program. And then depending on how time goes, I know there's been quite a bit of discussion about drought contingency planning, but just our thoughts on the drought contingency planning, those would be sort of the things that I intend to go through today. So just as a quick background, I note that our division's mission statement is very much like the Colorado River District's mission statement. Our mission is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah's water resources. And so everything that we do, we try to be sure that we're staying within the mission, and that we are trying to do what we can to help ensure that Utah's water resources are available to its citizens and are being used well and efficiently. I think we face some of the same challenges that Colorado and other states faced. Utah's population, however, is growing at about twice the national average, and I guess you could look at population growth as being good or bad or gray. Either way, the growth brings with it challenges that must be addressed, and so a lot of the time that we spend is trying to figure out how do we meet our future water needs within the state. They aren't simple questions, and they aren't simple answers. There is no silver bullet in all of this. We ask ourselves, how can we keep up with the growing demand that we've got, given that our statewide population is expected to double over the next 50 years. And we have drought, we have climate change, we have environmental needs, we have all kinds of things that add complication that hadn't really been dealt with and talked about a whole lot, or at least as much as it has now in the past. And so in accordance with our mission, we plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah's water resources. Water conservation, as you see there in the picture, is one of the important parts of Utah being able to meet its future water needs. We are looking hard at water conservation and the effect that it can provide to meet our future municipal water needs and industrial water needs, but also we're looking at agriculture efficiency projects and what can be done there. We look at the farmlands, the irrigated farmlands that are being built over with homes and businesses, and see the potential there for the water that had been used on those lands to now be used for those new homes and businesses. And with all of that, we still believe that there's some new water development that needs to occur. Also by background, Utah's area, land is covered by principally two major hydrologic basins. The Great Basin on the west side and the Colorado River Basin on the east and on the south. And our part of the Colorado River Basin is principally in the upper Colorado River Basin, but we also have some land around St. George and Kanab that is in the lower basin. And if you look just really carefully, up in the upper northwest corner, we've got just a little bit of the Columbia Basin there, but really our land is split about half and half between the Great Basin and the Colorado River Basin. So how is Utah using its share of the Colorado River? These are upper basin numbers, and as you can see from the pie there, agriculture uses the lion's share of the water, and these are the numbers for within that basin. These aren't necessarily the any water that's exported that is included here, except for that yellow wedge, which I'll get to in just a second. So you've got almost 80% going for agriculture, and then the remainder is split about equally between the municipal and industrial uses within the basin, as well as the exports out, which are principally for the Central Utah project. So all of these uses, in addition to Utah's share of the evaporation and other losses on the system, total about 1 million acre feet. So Utah believes that its apportionment of the river totals about 1.369 million acre feet. If we subtract out that million acre feet that we just looked at, we see that we've got about 360,000 acre feet that we believe that we could still use. So what are we looking at there? We've got a couple of big Native American reserved rights settlements that we need to take care of, one with the Navajo Nation and one with the Ute tribe. And if you add those two numbers together, they're about half of what we believe we still have available. We have new agricultural uses. Some of that will be new ag lands, but I suspect that a lot of that will be increased consumptive use with ag efficiency projects that are being built. And then we expect some new municipal and industrial water uses. And then we have the Lake Powell Pipeline project, which would take about 86,000 acre feet of Utah's apportionment, move it from Lake Powell over to southwest Utah to serve the St. George area. So on the map, this is how that looks. The tribal lands, we've got the Navajo Nation here in this corner. We've got the Uinta and Ouray tribal lands in this area where the Ute tribe resides. The municipal and industrial uses would be spread over the entire basin. We'd have quite a bit of energy development in this area as well as down here. And the new agricultural uses would be there. And then you see down at the very bottom of the map, the Lake Powell Pipeline project beginning there on the west side of Lake Powell, just upstream of the Glen Canyon Dam and making its way over to southwest Utah. So that gets us to the Lake Powell Pipeline project, which I was asked to discuss with you today. This map is fairly simplistic, and I expect there's a lot of you that know quite a bit about the project already, and so I won't get into a whole lot of nuts and bolt details about it. But we, again, start right here at Lake Powell on the west side, just about a quarter of a mile upstream of the spillway. We have an intake pump station that draws the water up and out. And then immediately following that, we have a booster pump station, which starts the water going through the pipeline. We have 3 more booster pump stations before we get to what we call the high point. And we have termed this part of the project from the lake all the way to the high point as the water delivery system. From the high point on down to Sand Hollow Reservoir near St. George, there's about a 2,600-foot drop in elevation. And so we have proposed to put a number of hydropower plants, 6 of them, here into the system as part of the project to capture some of the head that would be burned off and help pay for some of the pump expenses on the water delivery side of the project. This green triangle right here represents a proposed pump storage facility that Washington County Water Conservancy District may build on its own. It wouldn't necessarily be part of the project right at this point. So the pipeline runs about 140 miles from here to its terminus. We're looking at 69-inch diameter steel pipe at this point. We expect the cost to be somewhere between $1.1 and $1.8 billion. We are still working through the environmental compliance process on that, and a number of decisions that will come from that, as well as other decisions that need to be made, will help determine what the cost of the project truly becomes. That's probably good for that. One of the interesting things, the St. George area, which would receive most of the water from the pipeline, about 82,000 of the 86,000 acre feet, is and has been for a long time one of the fastest growing areas in the state of Utah. And again, our population growth in Utah is a little bit faster than the national average, and it turns out that for the year 2016 to 2017, St. George's growth was a brisk 4%, which put it as one of the as the fastest growing metropolitan area in the United States. Pre-recession, it was growing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6%. We had the recession, things dropped off significantly, and it's been picking up since then, and we're about 4% again right now. So some of the other western communities that are also fast growers that made it in the top 10 list were Greeley, Colorado, Bend, Oregon, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Boise, Idaho, and then the Provo-Orem area of Utah, which isn't growing quite as fast, but there's a huge population right there. And so as we go into the future, that's where the biggest part of the population in Utah is going to end up being. So why do people move to St. George? It's a beautiful place. There are a lot of interesting rock and land formations. We've got the national parks. We've got a lot of recreation in the area. The climate is really good during the winter. For me, I don't particularly like really hot weather, but a lot of people in the northern part of the state, I'm pretty sure, make it down to St. George at least sometime during the winter to try to warm up just a little bit. It's about a 4-hour car ride or about a 40-minute plane ride, just depending on how you go. There's golf courses, there's boating, there's all kinds of things there that attract people to St. George. Our population in the state, and that's shown on the map on the right side, is expected to grow throughout the state. Washington County, in the very southwest part of the state, their population increase between 2015 and 2065 is expected to be 229%. So over 3 times the current populations. The other fastest growing areas are the 3 counties just below Salt Lake County, including Utah County, which has that Provo-Orem area in it. But we look at the whole state is growing. We look at the St. George area is growing very rapidly. The numbers on the left show 154,000 for 2015. I think we're at about 165,000 people there now. And if you take that out to 2065 and 510 or so thousand people, we've more than tripled the current population there. This is an interesting set of maps that I will show you. The red area is the residential lands. The green is irrigated agriculture, and the yellow is non-irrigated agriculture, principally dry pasture and stuff. And this is for 1991. We've got several maps that'll take us through 2013, and so I'll show you that, and you can just watch and see how that red explodes as we move into the future. 2001, 2007, 2013. I wish I had a current map. It would be even more red than that. But you get the point. It's a very rapidly growing area. So a lot of the questions that we're getting asked right now regard the timeline for the project. In 2006, the state legislature passed the Lake Powell Pipeline Development Act and directed the Utah Board of Water Resources, which is my agency, to plan and develop the project. And so we got started on that. We hired some consultants to do preliminary engineering and environmental studies for us. We were talking with the federal agencies about how we should approach the NEPA process. And our first intention was to go with the Bureau of Land Management, because we cross a lot of Bureau of Land Management lands as we make our way across the landscape. And as we started talking with FERC about the hydropower component and learning from them that they don't play second fiddle to anyone and would require a second EIS unless we went with their integrated license process, which would only produce one EIS, we chose the latter, and we are working through FERC's integrated license process on the project right now. And that is a little bit different than the typical EIS process that most people are familiar with. You could say we are still in the environmental compliance phase after 10 or so years of working on it. Under the integrated license process, we've been required to collect basically all the information and data that would normally be required for the environmental impact statement in advance of FERC beginning the process of writing the EIS. In December of this last year, well, let me go back just a little bit. In 2015 and 2016, we went through a process of submitting all of that information that we had collected along with our license application. We submitted that all to FERC, and in December of this past year, FERC gave us a notice of ready for environmental analysis, which means they were ready to start writing the environmental impact statement. The wrinkle in that is that they also, when they issued that ready for environmental analysis notice, threw in a question about whether or not they would maintain jurisdiction over the pipe sections in between the hydropower plants. So our discussions to them up until that point had been that they would have jurisdiction and license the entire hydro portion of the project, which is from the high point down. And the question that was raised by one of their attorneys was, should we do that, or should we just license the hydropower plants? And so I said, well, you figure that out for us and let us know. If they weren't going to do it, we'd need to go with another agency, probably BLM, in order to get that taken care of in the EIS or in the NEPA process. And took a long time to get an answer to us. In fact, they still haven't, but we are on their agenda for next week. So the wrinkle in all of this was in February, after waiting for a while, we said, we would like to just halt the NEPA process until you've got that question answered. And it took them a long time to answer. They still haven't, again. And so last month we decided that we would like them to, in spite of not answering the question yet, go ahead and resume the NEPA process. And so you probably heard some news in that regard, and so I wanted to just make that explanation to you. So we're not sure exactly what we're going to hear from them. Next week we hope that the answer is that they will resume the NEPA process and that they will retain the jurisdiction over the entire hydro system. But we're anxiously awaiting. It's like Christmas, only we hope we don't get coal in our sock. So we, if we do get that decision next week and we do begin, we're looking at the draft EIS being available maybe in May of next year, and then the final EIS in hand by about January of 2020. And from that point then, we would look at the agencies finishing their work, getting licenses and records of decision to us. We would begin final project design, work with the state legislature on the financing plan. And I guess this is a point that I may not have made clear, is that this is a state of Utah project. We're doing it for the benefit of Washington County Water Conservancy District and Kane County Water Conservancy District, but it really is a state of Utah project. The legislature has begun setting money aside, but we need to finish the financing package and get those details together. Construction might begin as early as 2023, and the intent would be to have the project ready to deliver water and power by 2028. Okay. Let's see where I am time-wise. So the other big thing that I was asked to talk about was the Colorado River Salinity Control Program. And this is a program that is, of course, of great importance to the entire Colorado River Basin. It's important to the lower basin and to Mexico because it reduces salt levels in the river and correspondingly the damage that the salt does to the users in the lower part of the system. For the upper basin, the program helps reduce on-farm salinity. It also provides money to build agricultural water efficiency projects and helps ensure that the upper basin states can continue to develop and use their Colorado River water supplies. The Salinity Control Program got its start in the early 1970s after observing rising salinity levels in the lower Colorado River, and that was causing alarm amongst the lower basin states and Mexico. The Salinity Control Forum was created in 1973. The Salinity Control Act was passed in 1974, and in 1975 a set of salinity standards for the river were adopted. So from that time, the program has been working hard to help reduce and control the salinity levels in the river. Since the program's inception, it has reduced the annual salt load in the river by about 1.33 million tons. So that's something on the neighborhood of about 13 or 14%, I believe. It has reduced quantified damages by approximately $300 million each year. So far, there's been about $1 billion spent on the project. Our budget for this past year was about $38 million. I think it stays pretty much like that. And the current cost of control varies from project to project, but has been somewhere in the neighborhood of about $50 per ton. The project involves a number of federal agencies, Reclamation, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Bureau of Land Management are the biggest players there. It involves the 7 Colorado River Basin states, many local agencies and organizations, and thousands of individual producers who have taken part in salinity control projects on their lands. So what is the damage that comes from the salinity? Of course, the increased salinity causes major economic damage to water systems, whether those be agriculture or whether they be municipal and industrial, but it also degrades plumbing and appliances in people's homes. It also increases the cost for recycling the water and for wastewater treatment, and it reduces agricultural crop productivity. And generally, the farmers will go in and try to leach the salts off and out of their soils, which requires additional water to do that. So what is the source of all of this salt? This is a picture right here in your neighborhood. lovely landscape and looks like a great crop of grapes that's being hauled in. But you've got this stuff called Manco Shale here. We've got it in Utah. We've got it all over the West. And this is the principal culprit in that Manco Shale is the result of marine deposits that were laid down millions of years ago. And Don Barnett, our engineering manager for the program, has dubbed the Manco Shale as public enemy #1. But the thing that happens is you get water that falls and percolates through the shale as well as through the salty soils that weather off of that, and that is the means of getting the water or getting the salt from that soil and into the river system. Here you see the distribution of the Manco Shale. I understand these are just the outcrops of the Manco Shale that are visible. So all around you've got the salty soils that would have weathered and eroded off of those. The yellow outline shows the Colorado River Basin, so you see we've got a lot of that, but also just through the whole Rocky Mountain region there's a lot of the shale. So this map shows how the salt enters the river system. Most of this comes as water percolates down through the soil profile, either from canals or from irrigation or open ditches, drainage ditches that exist. It works its way down through and leaches out the salts and carries them over and into the river system. It's estimated that about 75 to 80% of the salt load in the river comes through this mechanism. The other 20 or 25% comes as water flows overland and picks up salts or soils are eroded, salty soils are eroded into the stream and carry the salt with them. I think this is an interesting map in that it shows the concentration of the salinity as it makes its way through the river system. You see up here in the upper reaches, you have dark blue lines which correspond with the lowest level of salinity, less than 300 milligrams per liter, although in the highest reaches the salinity might be as low as, say, 50 milligrams per liter. And as it comes down, you can see that the colors change. Sometimes you'll see a tributary coming in, the Dolores, the Duchesne and the white, and there's a color change that occurs there because of the quality of the water coming into the system. Come down through Lake Powell, and you just get increasingly salty as the water makes its way down to Mexico and below Imperial Dam is where we're measuring the highest salinity at about 720, 740 perhaps milligrams per liter as it's come down through the system. Oops, there we go. So talked about the standards that were created in 1975. There are two parts of those standards. One is the numeric criteria. The other one is a plan of implementation. And every 3 years, the program goes through a process of creating a triennial review where it looks at that numeric standard, which has not changed since 1975, and also at the plan of implementation, which does change as we move into the future. So this chart shows the period before the salinity control program was implemented, and you see the rising salinity levels there that were of concern to people. From that, these numeric standards were set at Imperial Dam. 879 milligrams per liter would be the acceptable ceiling. At Parker Dam, 747 milligrams per liter, and just below Hoover Dam, 723 milligrams per liter. So this graph shows, since the inception of the program, the way the salinity has gone. And you see, this is for Imperial Dam here in green, you see the downward trend. And you also see how it compares with the numeric standard, which is this green dashed line up here. And the same for Parker and Hoover Dams. You see the downward slope. You also see that the numbers are significantly below the criteria that were set. This next slide I think is very interesting because an attempt was made to estimate what the impact of the program has been on the river. Again, this is at Imperial Dam. The green line represents the measured salinity levels. The dotted line is an estimate of what the salinity would be were it not for the program. And you see that it would have been much higher. We've still been within the standard, but much higher than it is now. And doing the math on those numbers, it's about a 13 or 14% decrease in salinity that has come as a result of the project, or the program. So what does the program do? There are many, many projects that have been built over the years. Non-point source projects include the lining and piping of canals and ditches, and Bureau of Reclamation takes that part of the program and provides money for that. On-farm irrigation efficiency improvements, which might be piping and lining on-farm grounds, but also sprinkler and other more efficient type of irrigation programs are really paid for by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. BLM, because of all the land that they manage within the basin, take on rangeland improvements and efforts to keep that overland flow from getting into the river. You got point source activities, the state NPDES programs that come into play. You also have saline spring disposal, the Paradox Valley unit, which is just over the hill to the south of us, and I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in just a minute, is important there, as well as the plugging of saline wells on BLM lands. So the Paradox Valley unit is a huge major portion of the Colorado River project, controls about 7 or 8% of the salt control that has been realized to this point. The point of the project is to collect the briny spring water that's coming up and flowing into or had been flowing into the Dolores River. And so there's a series of shallow collection wells which collect that brine. They pump it up to a deep injection well, which is about 3 miles deep, and they pump that water down at very high pressure. I think the pressure at the head of the well is about 5,000 PSI, and so at the bottom it's got to be much, much more than that. It's not a huge volume of water that gets put down, about 200 gallons per minute, but it is very saline water, and so this project has done much to remove salt from the river. As you know, over time there have been earthquakes occurring in the vicinity of the well, most of those very, very small, but occasionally one large enough to catch the attention of the residents and the operators of the project. So at that point, the solution has been to ease back on the ejection rate until things stabilize, and then ramp the pumping back up again, all the while monitoring what that's doing seismically. So clearly the future of the project has been in question, and Bureau of Reclamation and the Salinity Control Program have been looking for more permanent solutions. Currently there's an EIS process underway to evaluate several different alternatives to either replace or supplement the existing project. And these would include drilling another well, evaporation ponds, or technology that's able to separate the salt from the water and provide a solid salt product. And the final solution may be one of these items or a combination of them, but our hope would be that the existing well could continue to operate to some degree well into the future. Okay, another big project being studied right now is at Potemkin Hot Springs near St. George, and I ought to emphasize that the study of future projects as well as means to further the science of salinity control and find ways to do that better is a big part of the program. So this project could be very similar to the Paradox Valley unit in that it would collect hot and very saline water that flows into the Virgin River here at this point. Potemkin Hot Springs was a favorite place for people to go soak in the warm mineral water. Washington County Water Conservancy has since bought that, and they, along with the USGS, have been conducting studies to come up with ideas as to how they could collect the brine. So they've studied the hydrogeology, the faults, and all of those things immediately around these springs, and feel like they've come up with a way that they could get the water out of the ground and out of the river. However, they've not yet looked at ways to dispose of the salt. The Water Conservancy District, we know, is very interested in developing the water if it could be cost-effectively desalinated, and so that's one of the options on the table also. Water's not nearly as saline as at Paradox, but there's more of it. And it's believed that at full production, the project could remove somewhere between 70 to 90,000 tons of salt per year. So that's something that's being looked at. So the salinity control project is very important to the entire basin. It's very important that be continued, that we have the funding and the interest and the resources necessary to keep that going. So I've got just a few minutes, I think, to talk about Utah's views on drought contingency planning. And it was very interesting to hear the discussions this morning. Utah is very much on board with the drought contingency planning efforts that are going on. We think it's very important that we have a plan in our pocket. We have been through many, many years of drought now. We don't know how long this drought is going to continue. We don't know if this drought is climate change. We don't know. Our crystal ball isn't that good, I guess is what I'm saying. And so it just seems very good and prudent for us to be working on these plans and working on them in concert with the other upper basin states and with the lower basin in order to get the biggest bang for the buck out of those. Along with the things that Andy said this morning, we too are interested in ensuring that if we enter into a demand management type of project, that we are able to get some storage capacity in Lake Powell, that the federal government does not charge us for that storage, that water is not tied to the 07 guidelines. We're in an increase in elevation caused by that demand storage would trigger additional releases for equalization or balancing. Also interested in making sure that it is voluntary and compensated. We also want to be sure that other users are not affected as a result of that. And then as he got on down the list, it was more Colorado specific, but very much we are on board. The Upper Basin states have been working together on the Upper Basin Drought Contingency Plan. Had a conference call this morning, and so I missed part of the discussion this morning, but very interested in moving through that process. Believe there will be opportunity for the districts and those who are affected by it to know what is in those documents. Myself, I have talked with those on the Colorado River who might have concern about what this would be, about what the DCP is and what it is not, and that, you know, unless they've got an initial unit reservoir that could be subject to the drought operations portion, I have much to worry about there. And in the end, they have everything to gain because, as Andy mentioned, the thing that we do not want to have happen is a curtailment in the upper basin. And so I think I am just about out of my time. Maybe got a little time for questions if there are any.
Questions here?
Yes, with respect to the Lake Powell Pipeline environmental review process under FERC, when will there be opportunities for public and stakeholder input?
Okay, so we have gone through the scoping process, albeit that was a long time ago. That was in 2008 that happened. We've had public open house type things from time to time to try to explain the project. But to answer your question, in this process of asking FERC to resume the process again, there will be a public process involved with that. The draft EIS, as I noted, we hope to have out in May. There would be public input opportunity there, and through that whole process. And so I can't give you specifics, but if you let's see, I'm gonna go right there. If you can get on FERC's website and find out more about the project from their perspective, the docket number that you need is P-12966. With that, you can get access to the documents and discussion about the process. You can always call us if you've got a question about that also. Here's a couple websites that may be of interest to you that I should have put up earlier that will give you more information than the quick high-level information that I just gave you about Lake Powell Pipeline and the Salinity program. Okay?
I have a question. Okay. No, not yet. So we this morning we heard about the Upper Colorado River Compact in 1948. How does the Lake Powell Pipeline fit into Utah's piece of that compact? And it's a little bit curious. It's coming from, this is just me, just coming from the lower basin actually back to the upper basin, but you know, it curves through the lower basin. So I get, the question is, how does it comport with the compact?
Yeah. That's a good question, one that we get asked from time to time. Just depending on your reading of the compact, it could sound as though without some special provision that we could not use our upper basin water, which is what we would be delivering in Utah's lower basin, which is where St. George is. We've had numerous discussions with the other states over the years. We in fact have a resolution of the Upper Colorado River states saying that, yeah, we're okay with you using your upper basin water in your lower basin, but not in anybody else's lower basin. And the other thing is that we have committed to all of the states that we will seek legislation similar to what, and have language in it similar to what is in the Gallup project legislation that would cement that we've got federal approval to use our upper basin water in our lower basin. Does that help? Okay.